the red blue conversation is not really the crux of what the main issues are, because there are still like a lot of conservative values to be found in the Democratic Party too. White folks are not the only people in these rural areas either. If you're thinking that things like education for Black people get better under conservatism, you have like Reaganomics to look at. Or if you think that like incarceration gets better under republicanism, you have Reaganomics to point to. If you think housing gets better, again, you have like Reaganomics to look to. And I think that's where Christine Drazen is shooting from.
Welcome back to the Black Oregon POV podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Poinsett, and this is where we ask big questions and explore big ideas that are facing Black Oregonians. Today, I have Donovan Scribes, writer, communications consultant, author of the Black Byline column for the Portland Mercury with me. First off, how are you doing tonight, Donovan?
I'm doing all right.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So you just dropped a new column. It's an open letter to Governor Tina Kotek that includes some suggestions for, quote, a few things that will make it easier for us to vote for you this November. So, you know, coming in hot during a very important time. But one of the things before we get into the column itself is a conversation I've been having with a lot of people. I want to get your take on this is, do you feel like Oregon is in danger of flipping red more so than people realize?
We are, and we do have this two-party system, right? Like you go red or blue, but I was a part of the conversation project through Oregon Humanities for about 5 years, and I had this workshop that I was doing called Music as a Tool for Justice. And when I would do the presentation, I would show this electoral map from the 80s when Reagan first ran, and he won every single state when he ran, except for one, and I'm actually blanking on which state it was, but Oregon was not that state. We voted for Reagan, and so just knowing that that was not that long ago that we voted for Reagan while he was campaigning off of "Let's Make America Great Again," we are in that danger. And then in more recent times, of course, like Christine Drazen, who's the Republican candidate for governor this year, she was just a few points off from Tina Kotek. And so it's always kind of interesting, like if you listen to some of these news outlets, they'll be like, Oregon is solidly blue or California is solidly blue and all of that. But I don't think that's really the case, unfortunately, but uh, I think even that dichotomy is part of even why I'm writing the piece of like the red blue conversation is not really the crux of what the main issues are, because there are still like a lot of conservative values to be found in the Democratic Party too. And that may not mean, being anti XYZ rights, but it does mean that a lot of the same outcomes are being churned out. And what you have a lot of times with the right is they'll press on those things, especially in states that are blue, so to speak. And like, well, you've had Democratic leadership for so long, why not try a Republican? And it's kind of like saying, well, actually, I'm not even going to go there because I don't want to use the wrong metaphor around how much worse that is. But that is not the right solution.
Well, as someone who's done a lot of organizing work on behalf of Black Portlanders and Black Oregonians, I would ask though, like, what do you think, just maybe in broad strokes, are the implications for Black Oregonians specifically under not just like if Drazen wins, but kind of if there is more Republican leadership or even more conservative leadership in Oregon.
Yeah, I think the outcome just means more warmness towards the things that have been baked into the state from its founding, and so I think the trick here, and if you pay attention to Christine Drazen, uh, she really does not sound as bad as some of the other national Republican figures that are out there. She's not like stoking the same type of like white nationalism in quite the same ways as national figures like a Mitch McConnell. I think there's been a purposeful distancing even from Donald Trump, from Christine Drazen. Like if you listen to her, she campaigned with like Chris Christie, who was like all about Trump for a while until he got his from Trump, and then he was like on the never Trump train. And so there's a lot of people who kind of have been left in Donald Trump's uh, tracks essentially. He's used people, and when they're not of use to him, he will send his army to these people. So Chris Christie is one of those people, and so these people kind of get positioned as the more rational of the party because they'll say things like on a baseline like, yeah, Joe Biden won an election, like cool. That's not rational, that's just what it is. And so uh I don't see Drazen trying to hop on the MAGA train per se, but it does not. I think that's kind of the trick of a lot of things that are happening from the right wing is Trump has elevated a lot of things that have been inside of the Republican Party's base for a very long time. And so what you get with the Trump is like the very top surfacing, like it's not far off of what your worst fears of somebody who is going to be moving the white nationalist train forward, being at the top of your government. You have that now. But sometimes the Republican Party can play in dog whistles. And I think ultimately, if you're thinking that things like education for Black people get better under conservatism, you have like Reaganomics to look at, which kind of gets treated like the more rational party line of Republicans today. Or if you think that like incarceration gets better under Republicanism, you have Reaganomics to point to. If you think housing gets better, again you have like Reaganomics to look to, and I think that's where Christine Drazen is shooting from, and so it's kind of interesting to see how Reaganomics gets folded into like this moderation line when Reaganomics was extreme. It was the war on drugs. It was like responsible for destruction that we're still dealing with in this country, in the state, even defunding of housing programs. Like Reaganomics was deeply responsible for the housing crisis that America has today. And so I think Black folks, there's no way to believe that the Republican Party is actually going to position us to be better um, in really any stripe of the imagination.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition you named there, as far as the, on one hand, the, what do you call it, like the softening and not even repackaging, but just like the softening and selling of Reaganomics to the state. And then kind of what this column is really getting to, which is the dissatisfaction, maybe the type of stuff that kind of depresses the vote on. I know we're trying to talk outside of, or I should say beyond just like the two-party framework, but the, as for lack of better words, the centrism that I would say, at least in my opinion, can depress the vote on the other side. So even just like looking at, yeah, like you write from perspective, I see as like a constituent of Tina Kotek and, someone who's, filmed at an event for her, who's, you know, been in some places, she sees a million people, but, been more involved with the Kotek campaign than I've ever been, and appealing just from a place of literally just saying like, here are some things that would make it easier for us to vote for you because, there's been one of the things that comes to mind is like Oregon Education Association, for example, one of the biggest, biggest education, teachers, educators, school staff unions deciding not to endorse Kotek in the primaries. And you just have some of these things that would have been givens in the past that aren't. And, some of those, like, you would hope those would be alarm bells, but I think a lot of us would worry that it's just going to be a, well, either vote for me or you get what you get type of thing, you know. And you even put in, I want to make sure I'm quoting them right, but you had some very specific suggestions as far as, again, things that would just help make it easier to make this vote and differentiate Kotek from Drazen. So one was fighting for a moratorium on data centers. Another was stabilizing housing, looking at real rent control. Another was investing in real addiction and mental health services. And I'm going to get a little bit more into it as we keep talking, but a lot has happened since the I don't know, sabotage of Measure 110. Is that what we want to call it?
Yeah.
Then yeah, pivoting on public safety, committing to reparations, and announcing and holding a people's tour across all the counties of Oregon. But I think one of the things that kind of stands out to me, like even in these proposals, is use a lot of examples from rural Oregon in terms of like, let me just go back here. So like in the Dalles, for example, you note that almost 40% of the water usage is coming from the Google data center out there. You know, you mentioned nurses not being able to afford to live in Jackson County. Can you just talk about why it was important to, if we're talking about Democrats, why it was important to like highlight these rural, generally like red areas and what was happening there in this column?
Yeah, because I'm a Republican.
I'm clipping that.
uh, no, I think, I am talking to the governor. So, one, I'm trying to make sure that I'm not just talking, even though I am a fourth generation Portlander from this place. For many years, I was the comms director for the only renters' rights or a statewide renters' rights organization in the state. And so, like, I spent a lot of time working with people who were, renting in all these different pockets of the state. So when I'm thinking about things, I'm not just thinking of the Portland area. And, there are different nuances to these different pockets of um, the state for sure. But I think when I'm thinking about the data centers in particular, um, they are kind of, these rural communities are the places that they're being plopped in, because there's more land, you know, and so there's more land, there's less people, and then it's kind of being brought in as like it's money for your local economy, it's jobs, it's a tax base from these big companies. Like this is all the public benefit that you would get from these struggling places. And these rural areas usually are not, just having a great time. And I think the Republicans have done a good job at pressing on this like sense of the forgotten man and woman idea. um, and I my sense sometimes is what Democrats can end up doing and trying to appeal to the rural area, the forgotten folks, is move more and more to the right because the right has had strongholds in these communities versus like looking at the some of the practical things that could be done in these communities to make them more livable and make them more holistic. Now, you cannot like just discount the power of whiteness at times in some of these places and how much that is like the place that people are voting from. But I think there are really practical things in these places. And even to what I just said, there, white folks are not the only people in these rural areas either. You know, in Oregon, of course, this is like a very white state, but there's different groups who have found ourselves in the more rural areas for a myriad of different reasons. I have a grandmother who is in Pendleton, you know, and has been out there for like 20 years or something. Um, you know, like this is by choice. There are Asian folks in these different communities, Latino folks in these different communities. It's not one thing. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to just appealing to some of the practical things that folks are dealing with in these areas.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, for the first episode of this podcast, I talked with Taylor Stewart, and one of the things of the Oregon Remembrance Project, one of the things he brought up was just like by population numbers, like Asian and Latino populations are actually going up in Oregon, which again, people may not realize or even think about just with the current political climate. But on the flip side, black populations are kind of stagnant still. And
Mm,
there's a whole, obviously, like Oregon is a exclusion state, as you know, all the legacy of that continues through has an effect on that. But to that point, I think one of the things, and I'm curious as far as how you were maybe anticipating like certain responses to this, and out of your proposals, so like data centers, a lot of people are rallying behind, stable housing, pretty again, pretty universal, you know, addiction services, like it gets, there's some stuff wrapped up in there that gets all the demagoguery, but at the end of the day, it's still pretty broad. Even, public safety, listening tours. But the thing that I imagine is going to stand out to a lot of people is reparations. So, one, can you just talk about in a world where it feels like there's, this fear to even talk about reparations just because it's almost like there's just like a knee jerk dismissal of it.
yeah.
Like why you felt the need to include it in this open letter to Tina Kotek.
Yeah, I think for the very reason that you just said, is reparations is treated like it's a far out non-starter conversation. And in Oregon, because it's an exclusion state, there's just 2% of the state is black folks. We're still living in that history by way of our numbers. And so because we have that very fact to look at, it should stand to reason that when we look around our state, that we should say, well, you know, if we're dealing with that type of population because of exclusion, maybe we dive into the depths of those exclusion policies that we put in place, and not just exclusion, but like the disenfranchising policies that were coupled with those things, and look at redressing some of the ways that Black folks are living on the whole in this state, because it didn't just happen by happenstance. It happened because it's the natural consequence of, you know, racist covenants. It's the natural consequence of saying you can't own land here. It's the natural consequence of taking black folks land and literally building things on top of it, or not compensating people anything but pennies on the dollar for what their homes are worth. And I could go on, but like there's a lot of documentation actually in the state around how much has been done to take the small population of black folks and create a disenfranchised class, um, on the whole here. And so to me, these things, and I put it in the recommendations to the governor, but like this is not niche at all. Like it's no more niche than saying, okay, we just had a wildfire in Southern Oregon. We need to put money towards that. We need to redress that. We need to stand up housing. We need to stand up mobile housing. We need to do all these different things to make sure that people who lost something by no fault of their own are able to come back into stability as well as we can. And we need to do it urgently and we need to do it specifically because you're not going to redress the Southern Oregon fires by putting money in Eastern Oregon or Portland or any other area. You got to put it where the fire happened. And so these things are not like some out there ideas. They are exactly what it sounds like because Oregon spent a long time targeting Black people, and we have not done that same work of targeting Black people for booing ourselves. And so, Senator Frederick has since 2021 tried to move different reparations packages through the Oregon legislature. He's never been able to get that out of committee, and so ultimately, I think having the backing from the governor would do that well.
Mm. Yeah, to that point of, yeah, Senator Frederick and trying to get that out of committee, you know, I believe we've had a Dem supermajority during that time.
Hmm.
But yeah, kind of highlighting again, just beyond the two-party system and like some very real fears with Republicans in power, but at a certain point, you got to look at what's happening, where things are at, and be able to have, I don't know, I always think with the reparations conversation, obviously it's frustrating, just the way it's so easily dismissed and attacked. But I don't know if we ever talk about just like, how can we support, how can we support this economy? How can we, buttress some of these systems? I don't know. It's sure reparations can look like a lot of things. It's not just financial payments also, but there's just a lot like in a lot of these things, whether it's something that's like community specific reparations, whether it's stable housing, you know, other things like healthcare, these things, like these are ultimately what stabilizes, societies, stabilizes communities, makes places safer. It's not, we have more than enough examples and data on this. But yeah, just there is power in naming that. So I really do just I'm asking the questions here, but also I do appreciate you highlighting that in the list, even knowing the climate you're sending it into, which kind of to that point, I think the thing that whenever someone kind of comes out here and, questions like if there's a red choice and a blue choice, you know, the thing that's always you worry about is like, do you fear this being weaponized, both against you personally, but then also, again, against people just believe in policies that support people, frankly.
But yeah, I think I put this out and I said off rip that I don't think this is necessarily going to be helpful for me to put out. I'm somebody who works in communications. I work on different campaigns. I work with different organizations. I do work to try and work with the people who are in the seats by nature of the very work that I do. And so I understand that making a statement against the most powerful official in the state when there has been a Democratic stronghold on the state, like that's not like that's not going to do me well in the way of favors amongst at least the establishment of the state, most likely. But that's I think the whole point of like being a public official too is like there will be critique from people in your constituents. It's not uh, just you vote, you win, and that everybody just sits and lies in wait for what you do. It's a relationship that we're supposed to have, and for me, I'm looking at this, and I've now looked at 4 years of the record, and I'm taking 4 years of the record and giving my assessment, my personal assessment, Donovan Scribes over here, of the things that I'm seeing issues with. And in an ideal world, the governor actually reads these things. In ideal world, the governor not only reads the things but considers these things. Um, and I think even though I say it's just me over here, it's also not. Like even even though I'm not like I'm not out of the world. Like I said, I work on a lot of these things, but I'm not like a figurehead to an organization or a movement or, executive director to a thing. And so, like, I talk to people and, like, I'm not just speaking just as Donovan either. Like, these aren't things that just happened upon because they sounded good. Um, these are real things that people who want to be able to vote for the governor are thinking. Um, and so I think it would do well for the campaign to think about these people like you had named at the top of this, like the Oregon Education Association withholding an endorsement. This is not like the Republicans that maybe the governor thinks that she might pick up along the way by doing some of the middle work that are having these concerns. These are people that would be more inclined to vote for the governor that are also having these real issues, myself strongly included. And so I didn't set out to necessarily voice on behalf of people, but as I was writing this, it was like, this is not just me either. you know. Um, so do I worry about any blowback? I am sure uh, this will get a lot of different ranging perspectives from people on this, but I took a lot of time in putting it together. I'm not just shooting from the hip either. Um, these are well researched thoughts on where we stand today. And the truth of the matter is, like, I don't want Christine Drazen as the governor, and so I think, especially in an unchallenged primary for the most part, this coming right on the other side of that primary is as about as good as time to say something to the governor with the hope that we can get something stronger by way of the platform. So that's what I did.
And in the article, you also name some recent victories of actual DSA back candidates in Washington County, Tammy Carpenter and Mira Munoz. And I guess obviously like you published this piece, but how how much faith do you have as far as the ability to be able to actually like push Oregon even just like a little bit more left versus think there's just like a constant feels like a constant gigantic force, almost like trying to get everything back to the center at or even to the right, really, at all times. But is there is there some momentum? Obviously, like on a national level, even though he's like New York City Mayor Mamdani, but he has this national presence. You have like AOC, Ilhan Omar, the squad, several years ago right now. But like, do you feel just from even I would say from the perspective of just like again, like you talk to people, do you feel like there is something there for that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of bravery in the platforms that people put forward, and so I think we saw some evidence of that with the city council, where there's a Peacock, the Progressive Caucus of City Council, and I feel like those folks in general are essentially from the family tree of Joanne Hardesty, and Joanne Hardesty was like easily the most effective critic of the police to ever be on city council. Like we have a whole new program um, under 911 because of Joanne Hardesty. We have Portland Street Response, and we have advocates now in the way of that progressive caucus that are booing things like not just Portland Street Response, but other thoughts around housing and how to um, move ideas forward that support more people who are not coming in lobbying every single day at City Hall or have the time and money to buy expensive ads and things to try and sway elections this way or run research polls and do all the things. And so I think Portland, no matter what, like it is the largest city in the state, and so we do have that solid block of voting on the city council. So I do think you don't have to look to New York to see where the seeds of that may lie, and I think it's a matter of just continuing to look towards those things, not as like I guess not just looking at it as a one-off victory. It's you know something to continue to build upon and seeing like the fruits of the labor too, and being able to point those things back to constituents and say, okay, like I ran on these type of platforms. This is what we got off of this platform, because all of us are looking for, you know, the same things essentially out of politicians. Like everybody, whether it's the county, metro, city, state, they all press different buttons, in terms of like what makes their job functions what they are. But people are looking for how are you making things better for me around like education, health, and housing for the most part. And I think these agendas that the progressive folks have been putting forward are far more in line with making those things better for us. And then you just got to continue to make that case. So, um, and I think, again, to the Zoran Mondami point, if it comes from the top, there's even more power that can get outsourced to people when it comes from the top. So, like, city council is important. Tina Kotek was actually fairly progressive in the Oregon legislature. And so I think if she leaned into some of those values, not just as values on a heart level, but like policy made policy, um, that it would have an even stronger effect for races across the board in Oregon. Um, and I talked about this in the piece too. Like I think with the Mondami, of course, that's the thing that a lot of people are looking to. Like Mondami is very, very charismatic. He's like a very specific type of like politician. Like he's politician almost slash celebrity at this point. I don't think you have to be that to be able to still outsource uh, that type of, I guess, show and prove of your cause and effect. It's nice to have if you have a celebrity politician, but it's not necessary. And again, the Oregon governor has the bully pulpit, so at any given time, she can be pointing this way or that way and saying this is the way that works for Oregonians. And if she's doing things herself, that makes it even more evident that this is the way for people. Then I think we can have those waves. So um, I think it's possible. I think it's decisions that people have to make, though.
Well, Donovan, I appreciate you being generous with your time this evening. Is there anything else you'd like to add about this open letter or any messages directly for Governor Kotek?
Yeah, I would say if you read the letter, I would welcome a conversation. And if you read the letter and don't have time, maybe read it one more time and talk to your team about how these things can be made real. Because again, this is not just me alone here. I think these are the things that uh, folks might be looking for going into November.
I'll just add this, Governor Kotek. I generally have a rule for the Black Oregon POV. It's Black people, Black conversations. But if you're willing to respond to Donovan on the podcast, you could be. I'm not gonna call you one of the good ones, but you could be on here. Anyways, before I let you go,
Mm-hmm.
I should have done this up top, but congratulations are in order. So obviously last year you curated a special edition of the Mercury, the Blackout, which was recognized as part of the Mercury winning second place for the Society of Professional Journalists in General Excellence this year. So I just want to, before I let you go, congratulate you on excellence
Hey, thank
and
you.
doing great work, unapologetically centering Black voices. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I have an essay featured in there,
Hey,
but
hey.
that's a few pages. That's a whole issue.
Well, it was all part of the whole, and yeah, super proud of that. Super proud of everybody who was a part of that thing, and yeah, it was a surprise. But yeah, shout out to you. Shout out to all the writers, all the people who put their hands in the blackout. Yeah, 1 year later, and it's still getting out there. So thank you.
Congratulations, sir. Donovan Scribes, everyone. Check out the Black Byline and the Portland Mercury. And we just might have more to talk about. I have a hunch it may
Mm,
happen.
maybe, maybe. Yeah.
Please like, comment, share, and subscribe so we can help grow this channel. And if you want more content, make sure to follow Black Oregon POV on Instagram.